Ryan and I are here with a preview for Armello. This is the tabletop version of Armello. The video game came out like 6 or 7 years ago, and this has been a long time coming. We have it set up here on the table. This should be noted, it's a prototype that we have here, so we're using some pieces and parts that may be a little bit different or look a little bit different in the final product.
Yeah, I mean, for example, we're using these standees and we're actually laying them down so you can kind of get a better view of the board from above. But there will be miniatures in the final game that are available. Like these, for example, that we're using to represent our characters, because you do play as a specific character in this game. That particular character comes with a board with some different stats and a unique ability, as well as their own basic deck of cards, because this is a deck building game. Everyone starts off with a base deck. Unlike some, though, it's not the same for everybody. It's based on which character you're playing, and then you're going to be able to improve this deck over time by buying cards from this row out here, by gaining experience that unlocks cards from your special experience deck, and from earning item cards as you play through the game as well. And these cards come in with a variety of different abilities. Some of them are combat focused, some of them are like traversal focused and doing things on the world map focused, because moving around this map and interacting with things is a significant part of the game. Yeah,
at its heart, this is an adventure game. You are anthropomorphic characters in a fantasy setting trying to set out here doing a number of different things to collect prestige. A lot of the things you're going to be doing to collect prestige is completing quests, doing all sorts of combat against all sorts of people, including the other players at the table, and then potentially, if you can, collecting these spirit stones that will pop up at the stone circles every once in a while.
Yeah, and all of this is done by moving around this board. You're going to start at a particular location on one of the edges of the board, and you'll notice that the board is divided into all these different terrain hexes, and then of course in these different areas marked with cardinal directions. That helps because there's going to be a lot of times that the board is going to randomly spawn those spirit stones, or some new enemies will come out. It's going to have you rolling a die a lot to kind of determine where things move and things like that. But each one of these areas is divided into these different types of terrain. And of course, each one of these types of terrain does something different when you interact with it. So a lot of the game is moving across this board, interacting with terrain, fighting potentially with the enemies, exploring these dungeons, and trying to make the most out of your turns if you can.
Yeah, and like any good board game based on a video game with all sorts of adventure going on terrain, there is a day and a night cycle. So every round is effectively going to be comprised of dawn leading into day and dusk leading into night. Every player is going to get a full set of actions in a turn, each of those segments of every round. But after the setup for dawn, you're going to go into that, and you're going to, on your turn, roll some Armello dice. Everyone has 2 of them. These are things you can use during your turn to do things. They have some standard uses, but they can also be used to enhance cards or some of the other things you do. You're also going to get 3 movement for every round, at least every day and every night. And you're going to be able to move around this board. You're also going to be able to use 2 of those action cards Ryan mentioned. They have the gold border. The combat ones you can also use 2 of during combat only. But these are the things you can do to sort of puzzle out and piece together getting what you want to get done on the board.
Yeah, like David said, you only get 3 moves standard, and that, each time you move, you actually completely evaluate the ability, the enemies, anything that's in that space before you then move on to take your next turn. There's a lot of things motivating you to move around the board. David mentioned that these spirit stones are going to randomly pop out across the board. Those are going to give you a significant amount of prestige. You're going to need that prestige to win the game. The other way that you can get it is by fighting, and you'll see that these enemies are going to be moving around. You can get prestige by going to an enemy location and fighting it, or going and fighting your other player if that's what you feel like doing.
Don't do that with me, though.
Or the last thing are these quest markers, and these are going to be set out as far away from you as possible, but they give you a goal. If you can complete your quest, you get a large amount of prestige for that as well. And those are kind of the 3 ways that you're going to want to get prestige.
Yeah, those are the 3 ways. I'd say the cardinal direction, if you will, at the beginning of the game are those quests, though, because you're going to get 2 at the beginning of the game. You're going to choose one, and like Ryan said, you're going to set that destination on the other side of the board. You're always going to do that whenever you choose a new quest card, so that it forces you to traverse across the land. But those quests can be significant. The prestige you're looking for is 70 to trigger the end of the game, or 30 to trigger it in a different way. Any player who has 30 can enter the palace. You can't enter it before then, and try to take on the king, which is a really, really challenging fight. I would not advise doing that right away.
Sure.
But the quests can give you, this one gives you 14 points. On that road to 30 or 70, 14 points is quite a bit. You can get a few quests. Those spirit stones can be very significant. Those pop up, like Ryan said, at the standing stone locations. You get your first, it's nothing. But once you get your second, your third, and your fourth, it starts to accumulate. And you get up to 30 prestige points once you collect your fourth stone, which is pretty crazy.
And that's where this die comes into play. It tells you where to put these stones. So you can try to position yourself in a way that is going to be maybe near some of these standing stones if they populate. But also you're going to want to visit some of these other locations. Like these settlements here allow you to put a control marker in them, which is going to get you more gold during the dawn phase. In addition, you've got these dungeons I mentioned briefly that allow you to roll some dice and get some rewards. There could be some dangers in there.
Could be some dangers.
There could even be soul stones in the dungeons.
Absolutely.
So visiting those dungeons is important. And all of the terrain kind of gives you a little bit of a benefit, except for the mountains actually, they just cost more movement to cross. So there's not a lot you're doing there. And then, of course, the standing stones we mentioned and the swamps which hurt you. So there's just a lot of different things that can happen as you're traversing over this map.
Yeah, and like we said, that day and night cycle is going to affect things as you move across the board and as you're taking your turns. During the dawn, you're going to get some money, and you're going to be activating the guards on the board. So the guards could actually move around. They might come in and attack you. And again, it's up to, oftentimes, the underdog, the person in last place, to decide what that guard does, because there's a king's decree that comes out during the dawn that you just read, you do what it says, and in some cases it gives the underdog the opportunity to direct where that happens. It's also going to banish or trash some of the cards in the market. Then you play your day phase, then you go into dusk. Dusk is going to do something similar to dawn, where instead of money, it's going to give you magic, and it's going to activate the Banes instead of the guards. But that's the general structure of the game.
Yeah, in addition, when you're drafting these cards or buying these cards into your hand, a lot of them do have special abilities, and some of these special abilities can only be triggered at day or during night. Some of your dice faces are better in day, and some of them are better at night. So there's quite a bit that's actually impacted by the changing cycle. And of course, we talked about when you're building your deck, you're buying these cards, and then you're triggering them during your turn. And some of them even require you to spend like your Armello dice, like this card right here that actually has a bonus that will trigger, but requires you to spend one of these dice. And you only get 2 of these dice in the game, but you get to roll them at the start of every turn. So that during that day phase and during the night phase, you get to roll 2. Now, you can actually earn more of these dice, as well as progressing your character or effectively leveling them up by completing those quests. Every quest has a reward. It's always going to be some kind of prestige. It's going to be some kind of items that you can get, maybe some of your special experience cards, but then also a permanent stat increase as well. So there are ways to kind of increase your character's abilities and make them stronger outside of just buying cards to add to your deck.
Yeah, and you are going to want to get stronger. We already mentioned this to some degree, but combat is going to happen. You are going to fight whether you like it or not at some point or another. And fighting is handled, we're not going to get down into the details too much, but it's handled in a different way slightly depending on who you're fighting. If you're fighting an NPC, you're going to flip over one of their cards after you've already committed the number of dice that you have to roll and up to 2 of your combat cards. Then you flip their card, find out what's going on, and then you roll up and see how things shake up. You're going to basically be calculating your defense against their attacks, their defense against your attacks, and you're going to get rewards based on a lot of different things. Whether you won the fight, even if you didn't slay them, and in some cases, even how much damage you've done compared to the other person if you're fighting player versus player. And then the king fight is even more significant because you flip him over, he's actually going to roll dice, so he's not like a normal NPC, and generally has a pretty significant effect, not to mention 7 health.
Oh yeah, for sure. He's a bear to fight, but like we said, you can only fight him if you're past the 30 marker, the 30 prestige marker. However, that's probably not a good time to fight him. Getting into any of these fights is going to require you to have a great hand, and that's something that comes into play throughout the whole game. As you're kind of building out your deck, you're having to choose, do I go heavy on combat cards or non-combat cards? Some characters are going to have a lot of combat cards in their experience deck, some might not. And it's not just about buying the deck, it's about setting up that perfect hand, because at the end of every one of your turns, you can discard cards and then you'll draw back new cards. So you're trying to draw into that great hand, and once you have it, it's like, okay, there's my combat hand. Now I think I can go into a fight. And of course, the game incentivizes you to fight other players by giving you more rewards for doing so. But the NPCs are going to be a lot easier to fight. So you are trying to balance that throughout the course of the game. But probably somebody is going to attack you at any given time, especially if you're in the lead. And somebody's probably going to try to fight the king, because the game will end if somebody gets 70 points. And if you're narrowing in on 70 points, and I have the opportunity to try at least to fight the king,
you might as well try the Hail Mary.
I'm going to try the Hail Mary, even if I'm just past 30. If you're below 30, sorry, don't let them get 40 points ahead of you. No, but for real, it's a gamble, because what we didn't really mention is that this damage has to be done at once. There's no health point markers or trackers or anything on the enemies. You have to do 7 damage to the king. He's rolling a bunch of dice. He could roll a bunch of shields. So you really need to come at this fight with all of your best combat in your hand, if possible.
Yeah, and speaking of that hand, Ryan mentioned that one big hand. You are still limited to 2 cards, so there's a little bit more of a nuance to the strategy here. There are other cards that let you play them as bonus cards, which are effectively free cards, but you have to oftentimes spend magic to make them, quote-unquote, bonus cards. So you can build up a lot of magic, get that hand, knowing that you can go in, play your 2 cards, but then spend a lot of magic to play another and another to really build up that big best attempt against the king, or really against a player or any combat.
Yeah, and of course, if you couldn't tell from the way we've been talking about it, there are many different strategies for victory. I mean, you don't need to focus on combat. Of course, you're probably going to need to defend yourself, because if you make yourself too good of a target, people are going to come after you. But there's strategies for just completing quests, trying to pick up all those stones. But then, of course, you can just go through fight after fight after fight and try to score points that way. There are some points hidden in the card, some combos that might score points, some Armello dice spends that might give you some points. So there is a lot of different ways to score points in that quest to probably try to hit 70, unless you're feeling really risky or really well prepared and you want to go fight the king.
Yeah, and that trip to 30 and trip to 70 is probably a little quicker than you expect. Completing the quests and doing all the things really makes some big jumps. It doesn't start off right away in the first round or 2, but then once a quest starts getting done, people are making pretty big jumps around the board.
Yeah, you can get 14 points for a quest. You can get 5 points for winning for a combat. So they do stack up. So they kind of reward different play styles and kind of let you kind of really build your own path.
Yeah, so that is Armello. If you have any questions at all about it, please make them in the comments below. We'll be happy to get down there and answer anything you have. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.